Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It's been almost a month since Nvidia's new GeForce RTX graphics cards were officially released. The actual month anniversary is in a few days, but that's when we'll be talking about Intel's 9th gen processors, so I guess now is as good a time as any. Anyway, I thought it would be a good idea to look at the current state of Nvidia's RTX lineup and see how things have progressed since the very messy launch back in September. Let's start with the RTX 2080, the first card you could actually buy and the only one that actually launched on September 20th. This GPU has been, well, fairly easy to buy at most major retailers. It seems there's plenty of stock, albeit at higher prices. In fact, stock levels are so good it appears that 2080s aren't exactly flying off the shelves, which shouldn't come as a surprise considering our review and many others criticize the card for being poor value. 2080 sales have been so lackluster that we didn't see a single RTX 2080 sale through our Amazon affiliate links since the card was announced on August 21st. In that same time period, 17 people bought a GTX 1080 Ti, most of which came after our review of the 2080 went live. Again, that's not a surprise because the 1080 is much better value right now and delivers roughly the same performance as the 2080. Despite an abundance of 2080s on the market in plentiful stock, not a single variant is being sold at the AIB MSRP nearly a month after launch. As we expected and talked about in our initial review, even though the card does have a $699 MSRP for board partners, basically every card on the market is being sold at the Founders Edition price of $799 or even higher than that. And it's not like prices have been coming down. What you see at Amazon or Newegg are basically the same prices as at launch. What's crazy about this is that instead of cutting the price of the 2080 to the AIB MSRP, a price Nvidia specifically announced at launch and which actually makes the card competitive with the 1080 Ti, OEMs are choosing to bundle hardware with the 2080 instead. Browsing Newegg, you can quite easily get a free power supply, free motherboard, or free hard drive with your 2080 purchase, but you can't find a single card priced at $700. Some of the bundles are actually completely ridiculous. Is anyone really spending more than $900 on an RTX 2080 and 2TB hard drive bundle when a 2TB fire CUDA is only worth $90, making the bundle actually worse value than buying the GPU and hard drive separately? Not to mention you'd be better off buying the hard drive and a 1080 Ti instead. And no one is bundling this free hardware with 1080 Ti's. And this raises the question, if companies are so desperate to move RTX 2080s that they're bundling in all sorts of free hardware, when will we actually see these GPUs at the AIB MSRP? Or is the AIB MSRP just a complete load of crap? We saw pretty much the same thing happen with Nvidia's GeForce 10 series launches with the split between AIB and Founders Edition pricing. And quite frankly, if there are no cards available at the lower of the two prices at launch, announcing that pricing is pretty deceptive behavior, particularly if it takes half a year for pricing to filter down to that lower MSRP, because in that sort of time frame, you'd normally expect to see a price reduction. As for the RTX 2080 Ti, well, this graphics card is in a similar position to the RTX 2080 in that not a single card is listed at its $999 AIB MSRP, whereas all listings for board partner cards are at the $1,200 Founders Edition price. But then you can't even buy a 2080 Ti anyway because they're all out of stock. And on top of that, the card was delayed from its original September 20th release to early October. This is another bizarre one because surely Nvidia should have known that the 2080 Ti was the card most people would have been interested in buying. Even at its exorbitantly high price, the 2080 Ti does offer a new level of performance you previously couldn't get from a non-workstation GPU. But it seems Nvidia simply didn't make enough of these GPUs to satisfy demand, even though they are likely selling the GPU at a pretty hefty margin. So with these two cards, a month after launch, we're in a position where the card people actually want to buy, the RTX 2080 Ti, isn't in stock. Meanwhile, the card no one wants to buy, the RTX 2080, is in plentiful stock and even bundled with hardware, though no one is willing to sell the card at the AIB MSRP. That's a pretty pathetic state of affairs a month after the release. And then there's the RTX 2070. We're only a day post-launch, but again, we seem to be in a situation where very few cards are available at the $499 AIB MSRP. A few have been listed at some retailers, but most are out of stock or on back order. Instead, most cards are priced at least $50 over the MSRP, if not more. This is despite plenty of stock for all but the cheapest cards, and Nvidia going out of their way to ensure some reviewers had $500 board partner cards for their review. Another very sloppy release from Nvidia and a poor one for consumers. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room, RTX features. Nvidia has basically completely botched this one. Even though the first RTX cards launched about a month ago, there are still 0 games available today that support either RTX ray tracing or DLSS. In fact, we've really been waiting longer than that because RTX was shown off in Shadow of the Tomb Raider in a playable state at the GeForce 20 series launch in August. Since then, the launch of the RTX 2080 and 2080 Ti has come, and then we've seen a second launch for the RTX 2070, and yet we still don't even have a release date for just one of the games that uses either feature. When you dial down on the list of games, there are plenty that haven't been released at all yet, with or without ray tracing. But there are a few games that are currently available that haven't yet been updated to include RTX features. On the ray tracing side, Shadow of the Tomb Raider and Assetto Corsa Competizione have both been out for more than a month now. And for DLSS, games like PUBG, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, We Happy Few, Final Fantasy 15, Ark Survival Evolved, Scum, and Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice are available to play right now. None feature DLSS. And it's even stranger than that because Nvidia has a working, functional demo for DLSS in Final Fantasy 15's benchmark, yet there are no signs the game is set to receive a DLSS update anytime soon. We've seen all the jokes about how RTX ray tracing and DLSS is supposed to just work, but it seems the reality is far from that because Nvidia hasn't managed to get it working in any actual games you can play right now, a month after the release of the first RTX cards and longer than that since the announcement. Now, of course, one of the main limitations to getting ray tracing in games was on Microsoft's end. They needed to update Windows 10 with a new version of DirectX that included support for DXR, the layer that sits atop RTX and provides games with a ray tracing API. That update was first released earlier this month, then pulled due to a bug, and now it's back on track for a release shortly. But even with Microsoft announcing and launching their update, not a peep about RTX games. Not to mention, of course, that DLSS doesn't even require the update, and we haven't heard anything about that. Quite frankly, the lack of RTX-enabled games isn't a massive loss to consumers. From what we've seen in Nvidia's own DLSS demos, the technology doesn't seem all that impressive compared to running at lower than native resolutions. As for ray tracing, it looks cool, but all the reports we're hearing suggest it's a massive performance hog, and Gamers Nexus also has a great video on why the visual effects themselves aren't a significant step up from techniques we already have for lighting. You should check that out if you're interested. But not having either of these features ready or announced to be ready a month after launch is embarrassing for Nvidia. These are the features that were supposed to justify the high price of the RTX cards relative to the GeForce 10 series. Not only have reviewers been unable to test these features properly and see whether they actually add value to RTX cards, but consumers buying these cards today or anytime since September 20th have also been unable to use features Nvidia heavily promoted on announcement day. Now, a lot of these RTX complaints you've probably heard before, not just from us in our reviews of the RTX cards, but from many others. However, we kind of thought there might at least be something we could test or play by now. Fine, it wasn't available on launch, but surely working demos on announcement day should have translated to games consumers can play at this point, especially if the technology is supposed to just work. This entire launch has been a complete mess and points to Nvidia attempting to get these cards out before they were ready. Nvidia wasn't ready with RTX games to back up their technology, architecture, and asking price for their new GPUs. They weren't ready with enough RTX 2080 Ti stock and weren't ready to release the card on its initial launch date. They weren't ready to get RTX 2080 cards out at the AIB MSRP they announced in August. And they weren't ready at all with the RTX 2070 launch, sending out samples at the last second and scrambling to get cards priced at the MSRP. And I guess all of this once again points to Nvidia trying to rush out the GeForce 20 series on 12nm before 7nm production gets into full swing at the start of 2019. AMD is set to show the world what they've been working on with 7nm Navi GPUs at CES 2019 in January. And you can bet that Nvidia also has been working on a new line of 7nm GPUs for release next year. That puts pressure on the company to get their current products out as soon as possible before they're truly ready, so they don't become irrelevant when 7nm comes into town. I also think the disappointment with this launch has been compounded by the complete lack of decent high-end GPU releases for well over a year. We finally get a new series of GPUs, and what do we end up with? A massively overpriced new flagship GPU with an actual performance gain at the top end, plus 2 other high-end cards that offer worse value than existing Pascal cards that have been on the market for nearly 2 years for the most part. So yeah, this is pretty much where we're at roughly a month after the RTX launch. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on how Nvidia handled this launch as well. Let us know in the comments below. Consider supporting us on Patreon to get access to our exclusive Discord chat, and I'll catch you in the next one.